This is Northwest Reports. I'm Maliha Sayed. Today we're catching up with the mayor of Seattle. Bruce Harrell has been the city's mayor since his election in 2021. Before that, he served on the city council for years, including as its president from 2016 to 2019. In this episode, Cascade PBS anchor Paris Jackson interviewed Mayor Harrell to hear his thoughts on policing and public safety, working alongside the city council, downtown revitalization, and the NBA.
Mayor Harrell, thank you so much for allowing the news feed, the show that we highlight on Cascade PBS, to join you today in your office.
Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure.
We're going to get right to it because there's so much to talk about that's happening in the city of Seattle, things that you're working on. You've rolled out this downtown revitalization plan, and it's garnered tremendous support. And one thing that we're noticing is a lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people are championing some of the things that have been laid out. Do you think this, so far in your term, has been one of your biggest accomplishments?
Well, it's a good question. I'll try to answer it directly. I don't try to measure or size up different things that we do. One is more important than the other because depending on who's experiencing what we're trying to do, it may be more important to them. So downtown, for example, is critical toward our success, but not so much more than someone living in a neighborhood that may not even experience it, may not even come downtown. Now, to answer your question directly about our downtown activation plan, we affectionately call it DAP. What we're trying to look at is in our country, many downtowns have suffered. E-commerce has changed the way people live, shop, work. COVID has affected the way people live, work, shop. And so now, instead of just trying to go back to the good old days, we have to ask ourselves, what do we build? What are people's behavior and how do we use that to make a great, vibrant city? So in our downtown area, of course, and we could talk about some of the problems and challenges we have over 100,000 people living downtown. It is a great place to live. We want it to be active. We know that daycare is an issue. We know that dog parks are in need. We know that we want to increase density in certain areas, and so we look at our building code to think about how do we activate it, number one. Number two is we know that from a public safety standpoint that illumination is critical. Activities, the art, the theater, song and dance, if you will, are critical toward vibrancy. So what we did is we stepped back and say, how do we increase foot traffic? How do we get people wanting to go downtown? How do we want more people to live downtown? And we think we've, quite frankly, it's pretty smart because I've talked to almost every mayor of every major city to understand what they're doing as well. So we think we've given a good blueprint on what Seattle should be in our downtown area for the next several years. And a lot of it is working. And I'll give you one good example is if you look at the City Hall Park next to the courthouse. When we had come to office, that place was an eyesore. There was garbage, litter. People were sitting around and making it unwelcoming for others. And you go down there and enjoy a nice cup of coffee. And area by area, we're going to activate and clean up the area and illuminate. There's lighting down there that we invested in to make it welcoming. So I would say it's a great accomplishment, but all part of trying to get our city back to where we need it to be.
And speaking on making things happen to get the city back to where it needs to be, most mayors and city councils don't always have the best relationship, but the current council shares some similar philosophical values that you have, and many of those that are on the council, on this new council, are people that you have endorsed. Do you think this will play an integral role in accomplishing your priorities?
Absolutely. And I should make it clear, I think, I served on the council for 12 years. And I could say as a council member for the 12 years, I could literally count on one hand the number of times I saw a mayor on that floor. And I know as a council member, I could count on maybe two hands, and I still have a few fingers left, the number of times I met with certain mayors. Some mayors I never met with. And what I've tried to do, even with last year's council, is I'll go to the second floor, I'll understand what is their agenda. They ran for office I don't want to say to be a superstar, but they have their own agenda on what they want to do for the communities and for their district or even for the city at large. And so what I try to do is help them. I mean, I'm sure we are aligned on most things. We may disagree, but for me, and it's served me well as a person in the city, every organization I've been around, I've never said, hey, I need you to make me look good. I never lead that way. So this new council, again, they have their own agenda. They're going to work. They're going to stumble and fall on a few issues, but I'm very pleased that they're centered around public safety, housing, income inequality, race and social justice. That I think they are very aligned with what the city wants, and that's most important. You run on a council to be part of a team. You're not running to be a superstar. You're like a baseball team or a football team or a soccer team or, dare I say, an NBA basketball team. You're running to win collectively. And quite candidly, if you look at our history, many council members really missed the mark. They really missed the mark because it was all about their personal agenda and they were misaligned. So this council, I'm very confident we'll work together. We will have some disagreements, but we won't be disagreeable. And I've heard many of them say that. And so I'm excited for this city to see what we're going to do together.
You mentioned something that I think is a perfect segue. You said public safety. And if we transition to public safety, I was watching the press conference that took place a couple of days ago, and a lot of questions came up. But SPD is facing lawsuits from within, from longtime women employees and cops over sexual harassment, racism, and gender bias. And this week, you stood on that podium and you said that you were going to hire an outside investigator to investigate these claims. Do we have a cultural problem in SPD?
You asked the question, do we have a cultural problem in SPD, which then means I'm taking 1,000 plus folks and saying, hey, you over there, you have a culture problem. I'm part of their culture. I'm the chief executive officer of this city. I recognize that, yes, cultures always have to be changed for the good. And how do you change a culture? Well, first of all, you become the culture that you tolerate. So if I allow everyone to come to meetings repeatedly late, or if I allow race and gender discrimination to be implicit or explicit in behaviors, then that becomes the culture. So one of my life's mission has always been to try to change cultures for the good. At SPD, yes, it's been a male-dominated culture. To some extent, it's been militaristic in their approach. This is the history of policing this country. And while I never subscribed to a quote-unquote defund movement, the idea behind the defund movement was to how do we take out the militaristic culture, if you will, in a department and re-energize that department to realize they are to protect and serve and that no one should die over a routine traffic ticket, right? And that you don't ignore race, you realize there could be cultural or racial biases in everything that you do. So at SPD, to answer your question directly, we will open up the books, so to speak. I was hit with a question the other day, is how many complaints does it take before you reevaluate the chief? That's a fair question. Only one. It's not the number of complaints. It's whether the chief can do his or her job, if it's a female chief, his or her job effectively. And that's really the question I'm answering. Now, when one becomes a department head, what I try to give that department head is full disclosure. You may have an issue of this in your department. You've had some discontent employees in this department. The police department is like other departments. I've hired a lot of new department heads, some of whom have come from different cities. They don't even know Seattle. And I expect each department head to understand the vulnerabilities in their culture and to take action. So the question for this chief is, given the history of cultural or gender bias, I should say, and gender bias in police departments generally, what are you doing effectively to mitigate that, to build the culture that we need? I want you to show, as an example in this country, what could happen with this kind of commitment toward parity and equity and kindness. And he's being evaluated in that sense right now, and so it's a work in progress. Now, I picked him out of a national search. I believed in his ability. He has a history with the department, and he's done some magnificent work. But for me, I have a certain standard of excellence that I'm held to, that I hold myself to. every single day. My lifetime has been I've tried to push myself to the limits of excellence in everything that I do. So the question for me is he meeting that mark?
April was a busy month, and all months, every single day brings with it challenges and triumphs. But the last police union contract, when we fast forward to those accountability measures that were put in place in 2017, so we're flashing back a little bit, reformers will say that when we look to this new contract that the city and the police union are going to hammer out, people are concerned and have this question is, what do you think the next contract should have when we talk about police accountability? And will it be enough to end the federal consent decree?
A good question again. So the first thing is, I'm confident it will be enough to end the consent decree. Now, as a fairly accomplished attorney, I believe in accountability. I have a history of, again, litigating matters against powers that be. The city of Seattle, I litigated a matter against, for example, before I was elected. So I take accountability very seriously, and I think everyone in the community knows that that's been my walk as long as I've been in this city. There are two areas in the accountability. Well, let me put it in a positive way. We accomplished a lot in accountability. I wanted the ability to bring in civilians for some of the work that we could do. I wanted the flexibility to bring in park rangers for some of the traditional gun and badge work. We're able to look at the 100-day requirement by which we have to investigate certain potential criminal misconduct, and we're able to get that told. And so from an accountability standpoint, we accomplished a heck of a lot and will continue to do so. You look at our use of force, which is less than 1%, we are modeling what reasonable force should look like. So we're doing some real good police work out there, given the limitations of our resources and our person power out there, our numbers. We're still, below where we want to be from a staffing standpoint, doing some really, really good work. So when I tell the accountability people that want more, I say specifically, what do you want? Because we have the Office of Public Accountability, the Officer Inspector General, the Community Police Commission. We have a robust accountability system. So rather than people saying nebulous claims about we want more accountability, tell me specifically. I know there are two areas that I'd still like to achieve. Oh, you're going to tell me.
Well, I'm thinking one in particular is disciplining officers. I think that's one that people are saying, when is that going to reach a level where the discipline, they have more flexibility in the statute to ensure that happens if an officer steps out of line while out there on the street?
Okay, I would suggest to that I think that our current Chief Diaz has shown remarkable leadership in how he has disciplined officers. In fact, in the older system, it was our inability to discipline officers. So I'm not saying case after case where the discipline of an officer for misconduct was weakened or non-existent. In fairness to the officers, I believe in due process. I believe that if something is, let's say, for example, a person says something that's offensive, but they said it either intentionally or unintentionally, can I train that person up? Can I coach that person up? So there's an element of being too punitive, recognizing that there's human conduct. These are human beings. They are not robots. On the other hand, when you look at use of force, use of a gun, you look at strongholding or violence committed by officers, that's the stuff that under my administration we have zero tolerance for. So again, on a case-by-case basis, I look at every officer, what he or she does and how they're disciplined, and if we have to revamp it, we'll revamp it. But again, we could talk specifically about cases. I can't talk about any pending case. But you look at activities that took place, 5, 10, 15 years ago, we're pretty tight right now in terms of what we tolerate and what we don't. The court was incredibly concerned about how we dealt with crowds and protests. And
2020.
Yes, and so again, I think we made some remarkable progress there. Are we perfect? Of course not. But again, with respect to how we discipline, I will always have a chief that understands that we do have to discipline appropriately.
last year, we ended the year with a 7% dip in violent crime and then a 17% decline in property crime. But still, many residents are concerned about public safety. That seems to be what you continuously see or read and whatnot. What do you plan to do to continue addressing that issue?
Yeah. There's a few things. We are recruiting more officers right now. We're getting 250 to 300 applications a month. We're streamlining the process. And so we're now living in a country, Paris, where it's just not as cool anymore to be a police officer. That is just a reality. People are considering different forms of employment. But now I asked officers that become officers, what was it that inspired you? Because I want to tap into that. So we're getting our recruiting numbers up. We're changing processes that have been in place for decades, literally. The testing procedures, the physical testing and agility exercise. We're changing a lot of that to make sure that we make it easy for a person to join, number one. Number two, we've created the CARE department, as Civilian Assisted Response and Engagement, a non-police response, because we did realize we were sending officers with a gun and badge to situations where they needed another skill set. And that's under Chief Amy Smith. And I've created that such that it's a third department, police, fire, and care. And so you're going to see more and more skill sets there, which really are going to be remarkable in terms of addressing a lot of the 911 calls. From a physical standpoint, at the Public Safety Forum, a lot of people when you think of safety, also think about pedestrian safety, cyclist safety, transportation safety. So you look at how we, give you an example, how we eliminated right turns in dozens and dozens of high collision intersections. Because we realize when people are walking on the walk sign that the free right automatically, that's the highest area of collision. So in our transportation levy that we'll put on the books, it's centered around safety. And then you also look at crime prevention through environmental design. So in our comp plan, in our housing strategies, in our transportation levy, we're also looking physically, even in our building codes, physically, how do we illuminate areas to create more safety? So our approach is holistic. Now I'm also going to talk about $4.5 to $5 million we do in community-based solutions, realizing that some people come from trauma-impacted communities and could be vulnerable to retaliation. Perhaps they didn't have some of the cultural safeguards in place to prevent them from committing acts of violence. How do we go upstream? We start that at 0 to 4. You look at our pre-K investments. Now we have thousands of kids that are on our Seattle pre-K investment. I was part of the council at the start of this movement. So we're trying to go as far upstream as possible, realizing that even prenatal care with our nursing program is critical toward brain development from 0 to 4. So again, my approach toward public safety is just not more cops. It's how do I create an environment by which people are making good decisions and the environment is conducive toward you self-optimizing. For me, I think public safety, but I think about every human being reaching their potential.
And something that you said with regards to, I mean, you're laying out a holistic approach when you talk about public safety, and you mentioned that third department.
Mm-hmm.
Care is new. How would you rate care at this point?
So I think they're awesome. That's how I'd rate it. And I think Chief Amy Smith is doing a magnificent job of both recruiting the right people, and the employees there are, and I've done a few press conferences with them because we started off with just a handful and we're growing it. And I think they understand the significant role they play. They've eliminated a need for the police to go out. Often they've de-escalated so many situations. Now, there's other safety type of people around that we've started under my administration. We're taking the park rangers up, for example. I think I want to say up to like 26 or 28 park rangers from 2, I believe. And my numbers might be a little off, so let me give that disclaimer. And again, in park situations, which I really believe that they should be open and accessible to all, I don't need a police going out there and just apprehending people when perhaps they're doing some stuff they shouldn't be doing. So we want to keep it alive, and we will call the police if we have to, but that's not a desired approach. We have community service officers, the CSOs, who many are hired from the communities that they serve, and they could be a liaison between the police department and the city of Seattle. So Again, we've increased the CSOs in our approach. And so we're also, when I say we're looking for a holistic approach, I have new types of employees out there doing new kinds of things to take some of the pressure off of our police officers.
And one thing that you mentioned is the numbers are down with officers and the recruitment. And I want to kind of dig into that because the recruitment, it's been a slow progress, but there have been bonuses and incentives to entice those potential officers. So with that being said, do you think these higher wages will secure more people finding an interest in wanting to join the police academy and want to become a Seattle police officer?
I think so. I think the compensation is always an interesting question as to the role compensation alone plays into someone's career choice. Certainly in retention, we know that plays a significant role because as bills pay and the cost of living goes up and they're saying, do I have other options? So we put forth a very attractive package for officers to be compensated, and I think they should be. We're the largest city in the state and a very demanding job with the challenges, and I think they should be compensated the highest. And I'm willing to put that in front of the city council as I have. But there's so many other intangibles. And so we met with private employers that are recruiting, in the high-tech industry or in the educational industry, in the social media industry. And how do you entice your employees? Is it compensation alone? And so we've come up with some new ideas. One example would be if someone's is going to be a lateral from another city, perhaps they have a spouse or a partner that's interested. How do we make it very easy for that person to find employment, and have at least a pathway to employment as they relocate? I like outdoor stuff. I'm an outdoors person. So if I weren't working every single day, I'd either hike or fish or swim. And so I sell Seattle that, here I say in 45 minutes you could snow ski or scuba dive, or you could hike or camp, or go to a river and do some steelhead fishing. And you have all these beautiful outdoors here. We're a multifaceted economy. We are port, maritime, industry, high-tech, biotech, great university system. So Seattle has a lot to offer as well. And I do a lot of that. I'll actually do that tomorrow morning to a group of folks that may consider moving here. And I'm not selling snake oil. I'm selling the fact that we are one of the most rapidly growing cities in the country. That is just a fact. And people are coming here. So it's not just compensation. Yes, that's a component of it, but it's also what this area has to offer.
Kind of staying within this conversation, certain communities that have experienced trauma. I'm more so referring to those in BIPOC communities that have, in some instances, had negative relationships with law enforcement. What do you say to people that have been in those positions and the mistrust that they have with officers at points in their lives? And what are you doing in terms of, or what could you say in terms of reassuring them about the police that patrol our streets?
Well, the first thing I'd say is I don't have to go far to talk to that community. I just have to go to a mirror. I grew up in these streets. I'm half black and half Japanese. I grew up around black folk in the Central District, but it wasn't just black folk. There were Filipinos and Native Americans and white folk. I grew up it was diverse, but it's primarily people of color because that's where we lived in the Central District back in the 1960s. And if you look at my background again, I was president of a black fraternity and I was vice president of the Black Bar Association, and I've been involved in Asian and other BIPOC organizations throughout my life. Police officers are human beings. We all have biases. So what I tell folks, and with social media and word of mouth, I didn't change when I became mayor. When I say to communities that mistrust the police, all I can say is I get it. Man, I don't trust government, and I'm the mayor of a city. Trust is not something you should give freely, as I've told my 3 kids. Trust has to be earned. We have to earn it as members of government in everything that we do. We're human. So this is ongoing work. And so when I tell folks of color, and I don't care how you identify, what demographic you claim, that's cool. I'm all supportive of how a person wants to claim who they are, 100% supportive. And I don't know your life's history. I don't know you personally. And so over a cup of coffee, I always tell folks, I'm trying to look at life through your lens. I know my lens. I know my experiences. So, and I don't even put that, I don't project that on a race because you're white or you're black or you're API community. I don't project any experiences on you because I'm looking at you first as a human being and I'm trying to understand your human experience. I don't know what you experienced 20 years ago in your life. So trust is something you have to work really hard on, and it starts with trying to, again, look at it through the lens of the other person and building that rapport. And that's ongoing work every single day.
We're going to put a button in that, Mayor, and get to another pressing topic facing the city, and that's homelessness. And currently, the Supreme Court is weighing a class action lawsuit, Grants Pass versus Johnson, whether to legalize the unhoused for sleeping in public. If the courts, in fact, favor Grants Pass, that could have reverberations here in Seattle. What are your thoughts on what that could mean for the city?
From my standpoint, it's not going to have a significant effect. And the reason I say that is we will always lead for offering shelter first. That I believe that the issue of housing and sheltering somebody is solvable and that we go about it in a very compassionate approach. I don't want anyone sleeping in a tent and dying in the extreme heat or the extreme cold. It's as simple as that. Now, I want to give people permanent supportive housing, but in the meantime, I may have to put someone in a temporary kind of shelter, whether it's a tiny home or some kind of congregate shelter with other types of supportive services. I don't want someone having to live in those conditions. And I won't criminalize poverty. And so the legal flexibility or restrictions is not going to alter our approach because I believe in a humane approach. Now, I don't believe someone has a fundamental right to live right where you're blocking a person's wheelchair accessibility, as an example. And I made that point when I first taken office in looking at the route to the courthouse, that all of the sidewalks were cluttered with tents and someone in a wheelchair literally could not use the sidewalk and would be forced to go on the street. To me, that's a safety issue. But in terms of sheltering people, we will always lead with compassion and with the need to shelter them, and that is our Housing First policy that I was a supporter on when I was on the city council.
Next year, the city will face a nearly $250 million budget deficit. What measures are you considering? I know time is running out with our conversation to close those shortfalls.
Well, I tell everyone it's my problem, not yours. And I'm pretty darn good at budgeting, whether it's zero-based budgeting or marketing or market or target-based budgeting, that I don't want to prematurely talk about what we're doing to address it, but it will be addressed. I've asked each department head who are quite capable, what a certain percentage looks like. If you had to cut it down 15%, if you had to cut it down 8%, I put a hiring freeze on jobs. We're looking at where there's duplications in departments. My goal is to not reduce in any way essential services of the city. And so safety is an example, or even our housing strategies. And so we'll present a balanced budget. Again, we work sometimes 8 p.m., 9 p.m. at night right now, way before the budget process, figuring this out. So we have a plan. We'll unveil the plan at the appropriate time, but we'll present a balanced budget. And quite candidly, it will not this year. It won't involve any new taxes or new fees. What we need to understand is why the budget reached almost $8 billion, right? It's $7.8 billion. When I first took office, it was in the $3.5, $4 billion range. So we've grown exponentially in our spending, and I think quite honestly, we can be more efficient in city government, and that's what we're going to do. And so we'll unveil our plans toward the end of this summer.
Mayor, before I let you go, in your State of the City address, you alluded to a major development that could take place here in the city. Is an NBA team on their way to return back home?
So, it's not a huge secret that both Seattle and Las Vegas are the most attractive markets for an NBA team. And in full disclosure, even as soon as last night, I had dinner with two people that have both the means and resources to put this together. And so, yes, there are discussions underway. I'm very aggressive on doing that. Seattle remains a viable market here. And I don't think I have to convince even the NBA ownership group. There's a media deal right now that's being worked out, but we are clearly on their radar. And so for me, I'll give you a good example is I had coffee with the former mayor of Sacramento, Kevin Johnson, on how he is able to keep his team. This is about, maybe 2 months ago. And so I'm looking at the playbook on how you get that done. We have a lot of deep pockets around here that want the team. And so I remain excited, and hopefully we'll have some announcements here in the near future, but I'm not going to get in front of my skis, but it looks very, very promising here, very promising.
Well, we will leave it at that. That's some good news. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you for
Thank you for the
joining us
interview.
today.
I deeply appreciate it, Paris. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Northwest Reports. This episode was reported by Paris Jackson. It was produced by me, Maliha Sayed. The story editor was Ryan Famuliner. Our executive producer is Sarah Menzies. Thanks to Donna Blankenship, Josh Cohen, Jenna Martin, and Shannon Ortali for their help with making this week's episode come together. You can subscribe to Northwest Reports wherever you listen. And whatever platform you're listening on, please review us. We'd love to know what you think of the show. Also, if you would like to support the work we do at Cascade PBS, whether it's our lineup of podcasts, the video docuseries we stream every week, or the in-depth reporting we deliver every day, go to crosscut.com/membership. In addition to supporting our journalism, members receive complete access to the on-demand programming of Cascade PBS. For the latest political, environmental, and culture news from the Pacific Northwest, visit crosscut.com. That's also where you'll find a text version of the story we discussed today. Northwest Reports is a product of Cascade PBS. I'm Maliha Sayed. We'll be back soon with another episode.